Lawyers Bar Association. I have the honor tonight of introducing this very important presentation. This presentation is modeled after a similar presentation which is conducted by the California Council Association and the California Asian Pacific American Judges Association, CAPAJA. Tonight, I am pleased to welcome you to Strengthening Our Legal Community by Understanding Our Cultural Differences. This is a cultural competency presentation that's put on by the sponsors. This presentation is designed to introduce cultural competency in a very personal and direct way. A practice or organization is only as good as its culture. And if the culture of an organization is one that doesn't understand the people it serves, its own employees, or how they project their culture to the public, then it is doomed to suffer from the blind spots of its failings and risks excluding or alienating people within its own organization, as well as the people they serve. In the setting of the legal profession, equal justice for all means that we have to represent and serve all, especially in the forum of the courts. The need for cultural competency training is essential. We all acknowledge that it is part of the ethos of this profession to embrace inclusion and to develop a legal community where everyone is respected and treated with dignity. To have multicultural competency, we need to have a basic understanding of the norms of our own culture, a willingness to learn about the cultural practices and the worldview of others, a positive attitude towards cultural differences and a readiness to accept and respect those differences, and to understand that our differences are important and need to be recognized as a community's strength and not a weakness. This particular presentation is designed to educate this audience about certain aspects of community, ethnicity, or identity that are not commonly known, and to explain a practice that people currently do now, which is seen as offensive or insensitive to a particular community. Please understand that our panelists will be presenting vignettes that may be very personal in nature. In a sense, they will be sharing observations that are sensitive or may have been the source of pain or conflict in the past. So please be mindful that they may be intentionally exposing their vulnerabilities to educate all of us this evening. This is a safe place, and we encourage everyone not only to embrace tolerance, but to truly seek to understand another culture by listening. We have included in the information for tonight's meeting reference materials that have been sent to all attendees, along with, we will also be sending MCLE certifications after the presentation this evening. Judges, this also does satisfy the requirements for general credits. I now have the pleasure of introducing Benisa Bray. Dr. Bray is a private practice employment discrimination and permanency planning mediator. She is the director of the Contra Costa Probate Court Guardianship Mediation Program and is also the chair of the Contra Costa Bar Association's Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee. Dr. Bray is our moderator for this evening's panel, and she will also be speaking from an African-American perspective. So Dr. Bray? You're on mute.
And I'm on mute. So thank you, Judge Reyes, for that introduction, and welcome to everyone who is in attendance today. As noted by Judge Reyes, today's presentation is going to reflect many examples of cultural differences that, unless we identify with a certain cultural identity, we just might overlook or continue to be unaware. So it may seem like a lot, but I want to emphasize that tonight what we're doing is giving you snippets and just a taste of different cultural differences that we think are interesting and that people should be aware of. So because of the number of examples that we are going to share, presenters have a certain time frame, and Judge Reyes is going to be ruthless in our timing. And we are asking everyone to hold your comments and questions until all of the panelists have presented their vignette or presentation. And I do want to, however, acknowledge people as they have completed their presentation. So we might do it with a little sign language by just going, yay, yay, or like this. And we can do that in between the sessions. So with that, I am going to be the first panelist presenter, and I'm going to be talking about what's in a name and the influence of history on African-American names. So what's in a name? And as we get started, Teresa is going to be putting up a little quiz that you can take, and we'll see what the results are. So which of the following is considered to be a racialized name?
I think all of the above.
And I just do a poll.
And I ask that everyone please mute themselves. Thank you.
So as you're doing that, I'm going to go ahead and get started because we're on a time frame here. And I want to say that research shows that there are some names that are more likely to be associated with or even exclusive to African Americans. And Teresa, do you know how long the poll is open? Because I don't want to give the answer until we see how people.
We have 32 of our 38 people have voted. So, and I do want to say that everybody needs to participate in at least one of the polls before the speakers go on, and then one of the polls at the very end of this program in order to get MCLE credit. So, all right, I'm going to end the polling now and share the results.
Okay, so we have 80% with all of the above, 14% with Lakeisha, and 6% with Deshawn. So keep that in mind. So research shows that there are names that are more likely associated with or even exclusive to African Americans. For example, one study actually examined all birth certificates for all 16 million children born in California over the period from 1961 to 2000. And then in this study, it showed that names such as Deshawn, Tyrone, Reginald, Shanice, Precious, Kiara, Deja are quite popular among Blacks, but virtually unheard of among whites. And the opposite is true for names such as Connor, Cody, Jake, Molly, Emily, Abigail, and Caitlin. So of all birth certificates with these names, less than 2% of the recipients were Black. So names that are more likely to appear or are exclusive to one race over another are called racialized names. So those who answered all of the above in the poll are correct. So the interesting thing is that the response by whites and others to racialized names that sound, or what we call Black sounding names, varies. And sometimes Black sounding names are made fun of, including within the Black community. One example is, if you remember the show Martin, there was a character called Shanae that was created and played by Martin Lawrence on that sitcom. And Shanae is a stereotypical sassy, ghettoized, loud talking, flashy, big haired stereotype of a Black woman. And Black sounding names like Shanae conjure up this stereotype. For example, there is a person named Demisha, and she states that sometimes when people hear her name, she feels that somehow they think they know something about her. So when they meet her, they're quick to just say, "You're so well spoken." And when they communicate a little bit longer, they're very surprised when they learn that she has a successful business. So these microaggressions reveal implicit bias. And she feels that her name, Demisha, brings up negative stereotypes that are associated with Black women that are inconsistent with who she really is. And the thing about it is that Demisha, and what she's picking up on, it's not her imagination. Time and time again, researchers have looked into subconscious prejudices, also known as implicit bias, and have found evidence of people who discriminate against Black people solely because they have a Black sounding name. So characters who have Black sounding names are assumed to be larger, more prone to aggression, lower in status than a character with a white sounding name like Connor or Garrett. Studies have shown that Blacks with Black sounding names also are on the receiving end of discrimination in the hiring process. And also with legal representation, studies show that Black sounding names, people with Black sounding names do not get responses to inquiries at the same rate as those who have non-Black sounding names. And of course, there's been discrimination in the legal process with hiring and recruitment efforts. So needless to say, discrimination, unconscious implicit bias, and microaggressions directed to those who have Black sounding names is offensive to the Black community. And in light of these experiences, people often ask, well, why do parents give their children these names, these racialized names, when this is going to happen? Well, what I want to let you know is that there is a very rich history about naming conventions in the Black community, and names are deeply rooted in our cultural history. And it goes throughout history, starting with slavery, when our names were taken away from us and names became very important, to having to choose a name when after the Emancipation Proclamation, because you had to have a name in order to become a citizen. And so often those names were either just given to you or people took names of the slave master. Biblical names, and also the Black Power movement and throughout history, up till today, where people are very creative and come up with names like my name, which is Benisa, that comes with Benny and Teresa. So that's actually very African American because it's about uniqueness and being creative. And
so we're out of time, Dr.
Yes,
Berry.
I was saying, and with that, I am going to move to our next presenter. And I'd like to introduce Mika Domingo. And Mika is the founder and managing partner of MS Domingo Law Group, which is a trust and estates litigation firm. And she will be speaking from the perspective of a Filipino immigrant.
Thank you, Dr. Berry. Hello, everyone. I'm Mika Domingo, and I'm here to talk about Philippine languages. The Philippines is comprised of 7,107 islands. There are some 120 to 180 languages spoken in the Philippines. In 1959, the National Institute started referring to the national language as Filipino. And in 1987, Article 14, Section 6 of the Philippine Constitution designated Filipino as the national language. So where does Tagalog come from? Tagalog is native to the people of the Tagalog-speaking region. There are many other major dialects such as Bicol, Cebuano, Hiligaynon, Ilocano, Kapampangan, Pangasinan, and Waray. Tagalog is a non-tonal language with a relatively small number of phonemes, i.e. sounds that make a difference in word meaning. Tagalog has 5 vowel phonemes and 18 consonant phonemes. Tagalog syllables have a relatively simple structure. Most syllables are either open and in vowel or in M, N, and G, pronounced nga. You might hear a purist Tagalog speaker say, "That guy has a pelody conviction." You might not understand because of the F in felony is replaced with P, and the V in conviction is replaced with a B. The original alphabet did not include F and V. So since the Tagalog native speaker has no F and V in their language, their tongue will approximate the sound closest in manner and point of articulation available to them in Tagalog in this case. The second clause of Article 14, Section 6 of the Constitution states that as the language evolves, it shall be further developed and enriched on the basis of existing Philippine and other languages. Tagalog only had 20 letters, but as the language evolved, the letters C, F, J, N, Q, V, X, and Z were added. Filipino has borrowings from other languages: English, Arabic, Persian, Sanskrit, Malay, Chinese, Japanese, and Nahuatl. Many Filipinos are fluent in English, Filipino, and other dialects, because both English and Filipino are used as languages of instruction and government. Most Filipinos are polyglots. For instance, my mom and dad spoke English, Tagalog, and Spanish. Mom also spoke German. And growing up, I was fluent in English and Tagalog and even learned formal French and Japanese. Let's talk about pronouns. The Filipino language has no gender distinction in the third person singular, i.e. between he and she. Personal pronouns refer only to humans, so there is no equivalent of the English it. The only pronoun we use is siya for gender neutral singular and sila for gender neutral plural. Sometimes you might hear a Tagalog or Filipino speaker use the wrong pronoun when speaking in English. This is because there is no gender distinction in the language. So when you hear a person of Filipino heritage use the incorrect pronoun, please do not automatically assume that they don't know the difference. It's a function of the language spoken in the Philippines. The Philippines is rich in language diversity. The presence of up to 180 languages in the Philippines has been recognized by an international body of linguists all over the world. We are 10th in linguistic diversity in the world. Despite this, the country has been commended for its English proficiency in Amy Chavez's article on the Huntington Post, What Asia Can Learn from Philippines About English Education. The article stated, according to an educational testing service ranking based on the test of English as a foreign language scores for 2010, the Philippines ranked 35th out of 163 countries worldwide.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mika. So our next speaker is Julianne Giammona. And Julianne from Ferber Law is an attorney living with an invisible disability.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for having me this evening. My name is Julianne Giammona. I am an attorney that lives with an invisible disability. My preferred pronouns are she and her. One of the conditions that I live with is called dysautonomia. Dysautonomia is a malfunction of the autonomic nervous system that primarily affects my cardiovascular system, causing abnormal heart rate and low blood pressure, resulting in dizziness, shortness of breath, and fainting. Another condition that I live with is chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, referred to as COPD, a progressive lung disease. Who knew that you could get COPD without ever even smoking one cigarette in your entire life? Tonight, I want to talk to you about the word ableism. It may be a word that some of us are not familiar. It's another ism, like racism or sexism. Simply put, ableism is discrimination in favor of able-bodied people. Ableism is a set of beliefs or practices that discriminate against people with physical, mental, or intellectual disabilities, whether those be visible or invisible. Ableism is something that is intertwined in our culture. It is seen in the structure of society that includes people with disabilities, that excludes people with disabilities. It's seen on a personal level by those that treat someone with a disability as less than or not equal to. Despite multiple laws making disability discrimination illegal, ableism still appears as a socially acceptable form of discrimination. Ableism is subtle. It is ingrained into our everyday language without us even realizing it. Ableism causes the stigma, the silence, and the shame. One thing that I want to share with you that we may not think about as being hurtful to a person living with a disability is that words matter. How we characterize another person, label another human being can be so impactful, whether it's positive or negative. Last week, I had an incident in my neighborhood where I ended up calling 911. It was 11:30 in the evening. There was a gentleman standing on my front porch with a 2x4 ringing the doorbell and screaming. I was very frightened. I could not make out what he was saying. After the incident was over, I asked the officer what was going to happen to the gentleman. He clearly needed medical assistance. He appeared to be incoherent. The officer responded by saying, "Oh, don't worry, he's the transient." And in that moment, I felt a dagger in my heart. Hearing that phrase, "he's just a transient," we often hear labels like this, the homeless, or instead of just saying a person that doesn't have a home right now, or a drug addict instead of a person who lives with a drug addiction. These labels are very painful. Because they're dismissive, devaluing of another human being. Notwithstanding that most of the time, the person uttering this phrase doesn't intend it, doesn't mean it, and isn't even thinking about it. It's something that we commonly use. I invite you to think about language that we use when talking about persons living with disabilities. Instead of saying handicapped person or disabled person, say person living with a disability. Instead of saying handicap parking or parking space, let's use the phrase accessible seating or parking. Instead of saying retarded, let's use the phrase intellectual disability or developmental disability. Instead of saying the deaf, let's say someone who is deaf or is hearing impaired. Words really matter to people. Let's start a conversation about ableism. Let's use that word so it becomes a common term that people are familiar. Let's teach people what to say to a person living with a disability so that we can begin to remove the culture of silence and shame. A teenager living with a disability once told me that he had painted a canvas, and in the canvas, he etched the words, "I am here," because he felt so invisible. People looked away when they saw him, would not look him in the eye. I leave you with one final quote that was recently circulating on social media, so you may have seen it. And this is the quote. It went something like this. This is not a direct quote. "For all of you who were forced into isolation for years because of ill health before COVID, when no one was interested in writing articles on how to cope before COVID, when you lost your career because you were not allowed to work from home before COVID, and no one cared, we see you." Thank you for being here tonight, and thank you for listening.
Thank you, Julianne, for that very touching vignette. We really appreciate that open sharing, and hopefully everyone's taking this as a great learning opportunity. So our next speaker is the Honorable David Goldstein. And, Judge Goldstein has been a Contra Costa Superior Court judge since December of 2015 and is currently working as the supervising judge of the Pittsburgh courthouse. And he will be speaking from the Jewish perspective. And so with that, I'd like to welcome Judge Goldstein.
Judge Goldstein, we can't hear you.
And it looks like you are off mute, but we cannot hear you. So we can go to the next person as we work with these technical challenges, which is, of course, has been our life as of late. So with that, we are going to turn to Mary Grace Guzman, and Mary Grace of Guzman Legal Solutions, which is a legal ethics and risk management law firm. And she will be speaking from a Chicana Latinx perspective. Welcome, Mary Grace.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here and honored. So I'm going to be talking, we were sharing a lot about words, and I'm going to first start with the concept of the label Hispanic. Some of you may not know that term, know the origin of that term. And I know for me personally, I find that term extremely offensive. I am not Hispanic. I am Mexican American. I am Chicana. I am Latinx, but I do not consider myself Hispanic. And the reason for that is the word Hispanic has a Latin root of persons from Hispania or from Spain. And for many of us who are Latino or Latinx, we find that word offensive because of the fact that it's giving homage to those who had colonized us. Some people embrace the word. Personally, I do not, and many of us don't. The other that I would like to talk about is that Latinx people are not a monolithic cultural group. We are made up of a variety of cultural groups from 2 different continents, 33 countries, 15 territories. There are over 500 languages spoken in Latin America. Most of them are indigenous. And so, you know, if you see a client who appears to be a Spanish speaker, do not assume that they are speaking Spanish. They may need an indigenous language interpreter. And just like many of us who are here, a part of our history is the immigrant history. And that's extremely important to all of us. But going back to words and why words matter, you know, we prefer words like undocumented immigrant or undocumented person as opposed to illegal alien. We are not aliens, we are humans first. And not all of us are non-citizens. Many of us are actually citizens. So Puerto Ricans, for example, are US citizens with voting rights, with the rights to be able to sit on a jury. Puerto Rico is a territory of the United States. And going into more of the personal experience for myself with regard to the immigrant experience, my father is an immigrant. And, you know, a lot of people assume Mexican immigrants equals undocumented or illegal immigrants. That's not my family's history. My grandmother collected all of the paperwork and was tired of my grandfather being a bracero working in the United States and coming home, that she applied and got them the ability to legally move to the United States. And when I tell people my history as my immigrant story, a lot of people have even gone as far as to say to me, no, really, you can tell me the truth. Where did your family come from? How did they get here? And the truth is, my grandmother organized our papers and got us here legally. And finally, going back to language and pronunciation, I encourage everyone to take a moment, and when you meet someone of any culture, whether it's, you know, Mexican or Latinx or Asian or, you know, Middle Eastern descent, I encourage you all to listen to how people pronounce their names. My last name is Guzman, and there's an accent over the A. It is not Guzman. It is not Guzman. It is not Guzman. It is Guzman. And, you know, there's a judge in state bar court. And when I'm there, I always introduce myself as, you know, when we have to introduce ourselves, say, hey, you know, my name is Mary Grace Guzman, appearing on behalf of whoever. And that judge always takes a moment and says, you know, welcome, Miss Guzman. And he pronounces my name, you know, appropriately. And every time he pronounces my name appropriately, I feel myself sit up. I feel seen. And even with my own students, I always ask them, you know, to please take a moment. And if I'm mispronouncing your name, correct me. Because I think more than anything, for all of us, words and how we pronounce words really, really matter. And I thank you all for your time. Benisa, I think you are on mute.
I am muted. So I was just thanking Mary Grace Guzman and I would like to give her some appreciation. And I am wondering if we are ready to go back to Judge Goldstein, or...
Can you hear me?
Oh, we can hear you. Yes,
Okay,
very
that's,
good.
I'm listed
Perfect.
as Teresa Hurley. I'm not going to jinx it. I'm going to keep with that. That's helping.
Okay.
So let's do it.
Perfect.
Well, good evening, everyone. Thank you for having me. I will try and be as quick as possible here. I'm speaking to you from the perspective of a Jewish male in America. And with 4 or 5 minutes, we're limited on topics, but I want to talk to you about holiday seasons and the experience of an American Jew during the holidays. There's a lot of angst for Jews in general surrounding holiday celebrations, both Jewish holiday celebrations, but also those cultural, really kind of secular celebrations that are more generalized to the American community. Couple of reasons, and then I want to talk to you about some really simple practical things that you can do as bench officers who are maybe supervising a court, or as partners in a law firm, or as administrators of bar association, to take away those feelings of angst and exclusion, not just for Jewish Americans potentially, but really other members of other religious minorities, Muslims, people who practice Hinduism, things of this nature. What are the sources of some of this angst? Well, one, when it comes time to celebrate our holidays, we have to put in for vacation time for them. We have to burn vacation days in most contexts, unless you have a special arrangement with your employer. There's no couple days off like there is for Christmas. So when Passover comes around, when Yom Kippur comes around, I take vacation days for it if I want to take the time off. And someone used the word microaggression earlier. No one's intending to annoy me by doing that. It's just the way our society is wired. And nonetheless, it's very much a reminder of your minority status in society as a Jew when it comes around to having to use those vacation days. When it comes to celebrating the general holidays, again, most of these cultural celebrations are secularized, but they're also tied to the majority culture, and in this case, kind of the Christian calendar. So when it comes to celebrating holiday parties, they tend to be around Christmas time or Easter times and things of this nature. And it's hard to explain exactly why. I'll give some examples later, but it's very easy for a Jewish person to feel excluded and neglected and just kind of an afterthought in those scenarios. So what are some things that we can do if we have a court, we have a law firm, we have a bar association? What are some things we can do? Really simple things that don't require that you bury your own integrity or faith or beliefs. But what are some simple things you can do to cast a broader net with Jewish people and other religious minorities in mind? One thing you can do at the beginning of each year around the New Year's holiday is just print out a calendar. They're available online of the major Jewish holidays. Have them on your wall with a thumbtack. For example, this year, Yom Kippur is on September 16th. Passover is March 27 to April 4. Hanukkah, November 28 to December 6. These might be in your materials that we provided. To throw in an extra, Ramadan is the entire month of April 12th through May 11th for Muslims. And so just know about this and print it out at the beginning of each year. Get into that habit. And then when it comes time to schedule a trial, I have asked lawyers in my court who have tried to schedule trials or other hearings around the Jewish holidays. I will ask them, do you have any Jewish witnesses? Please take a look if you have any Jewish parties in your case that are involved. Will they be celebrating on that day? Can we pick a different day? If they're not going to Yom Kippur service, okay, I won't be here, but maybe another judge will be here. Maybe some of your witnesses will want it on another day. So that's something really simple and easy that you can do to be mindful of the Jewish holidays, to have a schedule, and then to use them when it's on the bench or in your office, if you're at a law firm, to plan things around that, to take accountability. a little bit of consideration goes a long way. And I want to talk to you about the big three Jewish holidays, because we don't take all 18 or 20 of them off normally. There's three that are primarily what I'm talking about. Yom Kippur, September 16th, Hanukkah, generally around Christmas. This year it's almost at the end of Thanksgiving to the first week of December, all 8 nights, of course. There's one more, I don't want to pass over the last one, Passover, there we go. And this year it's March 27th to April 4th. Some specific things to know about those holidays in your practices that are important that can help you remove the angst of your Jewish colleagues a lot. If we're going back, if we outlive this pandemic and we go back to potlucks, for example, around Passover, invite your colleagues to bring in some dishes that, a box of matzah, even something simple like that, because Jews don't eat leavened bread during the Passover holiday if they're observant, and it's an entire week's long holiday. That is one thing that you can do. I talked about scheduling for Yom Kippur. When Hanukkah comes around, it's really subtle, but someone mentioned Rosh Hashanah. That's another good one. That's the New Year's holiday, so another one to print out, absolutely. But let me talk about Hanukkah a little bit. Hanukkah generally coincides with Christmas time. Perfectly fine to have Santa and Christmas trees and other aspects of the season that are largely secularized around the office. That's fine. Consider throwing a menorah on the wall. One menorah on the wall, a little cutout, it goes a real long way to making your Jewish colleagues feel included. It's not required by law. It doesn't make you an anti-Semite if you don't do it. It just is a really nice thing where that's the only way I can explain it, where Jews really appreciate that kind of consideration come those holiday seasons around Christmas time. And another thing that's really critical, if you're sending out holiday cards that are secular in nature around Christmas time, around Easter, don't buy the generic Hallmark one if the person doesn't celebrate that holiday. Consider buying a Hanukkah card for your Jewish colleague, or make it a Happy Holidays that's more inclusive. It's not that you can't have cards with Christmas trees on them, or Santa Claus, or Easter eggs. I am not saying that. But consider the recipient. I can't tell you how many times I've gotten a lovely card from a colleague with different power dynamics relating to me, maybe someone I worked with or under, or even clerical giving me a card as an attorney. And it was a Christmas card. One was a Jews for Jesus card with a very heartfelt message inside. And they were reaching out to me and wanting to connect to me. Think before you do that. That's really an easy thing. But the easiest thing to do is to go to Target, and the most common card is the Christmas card, right? So do a little bit more looking if you're buying for your colleagues. That's a subtle thing that you can do to be inclusive and to kind of take away the angst surrounding the Jewish holidays. Remember, on Yom Kippur on September 16th, it really starts on September 15th. One fact about Jewish holidays, it's not sunrise, sunset, as suggested by Fiddler Ruth. It's sunset to sunset. Sunset to sunset. It really starts the night before, and you fast during Yom Kippur. So maybe not choose that day to have the big barbecue, the big office barbecue, or something like that. I'm just kidding. I'm joking around. If you want to torture us, fine, torture us. But that's one of the types of things that you can consider. Related to that are holidays like Ramadan during April 12th through May 11th. There is fasting there from sunrise to sunset. So during the workday, if you're observing as a Muslim, you're not eating at all. So consider holding the potluck. We'll come out of COVID potluck, that's what we'll call it, on May 12th this year instead of May 11th, or on April 11th instead of April 12th. These are the little things. By knowing about the holidays from the beginning, printing them out on January 1, and deciding when you celebrate them, just be a little bit more inclusive, a little more thoughtful. when handing out a card or putting up a decoration on the wall. It's not that hard to do it, and you don't have to hide your own traditions too. That goes a real long way to taking that angst away from a Jewish American or from someone else who is a religious minority. I don't have any studies to give you, like some of my esteemed speakers and colleagues. I can just tell you from my gut, this has been my experience growing up as a Jew in America, practicing in the legal profession on the bench, and I know it's shared heavily by my Jewish colleagues. Thank you so much for giving me the opportunity tonight to address you, and thank you again.
Great. Thank you. You were actually making me hungry there for a while, talking about what to bring to the celebrations.
Yes, and if people don't want to invite their Jewish colleagues to contribute to a potluck or bring in latkes, it's not so much that you're being racially discriminatory or anti-Semitic. You're just being foolish, because my family, we can bring it to a potluck. Anyway, thank you all very much.
Awesome. So let's show some appreciation here and great tips that we can all take with us moving forward. Thank you. We are now going to turn to Mona Nia. And Mona is a trust and estates attorney and a partner at the Bray law firm. And she will be speaking from the perspective of the Middle East, and specifically as an Iranian American. Welcome, Mona.
Thank you, Benisa. Thanks everyone for coming to this event. I'm excited to tell you a little bit about my culture and hopefully give you some insight into some understandings that you may not have. First, I can explain to you that I am Iranian American. I was born here, but my parents were both born in Iran. They both left shortly after the revolution and came here mostly to escape religious oppression, but to start, live the American dream and allow for myself and my sister to make what we could of ourselves. Having grown up here, I've really had a good understanding of the American culture, but I've also had this interesting insight into watching how the American culture has in some ways misunderstood my culture as an Iranian Middle Eastern person. I was slated to speak about the Middle Eastern culture, which is a tough thing to do because the Middle East is huge. So many different countries, so many different cultures involved. So what I decided to do was, in preparation of this presentation, I kind of reached out to a bunch of my good friends from different parts of the Middle East, Iranian, Turkish, Afghani, and Lebanese friends, to see kind of what common misconceptions they could fill me in on that they feel that the American culture just doesn't acknowledge or understand. First and foremost, I think the most common one I heard said among all of the groups was that whenever someone is from the Middle East, it's assumed that they are Muslim. And a lot of times, assuming that they're Muslim, a lot of the stereotypes associated with being Muslim were associated to them. And it's pretty interesting, similar to why my parents came here, that there are a lot of Middle Eastern people who are not Muslim. I technically know more Jewish and Christian Iranians than I do actually practicing Muslims. So it's something that is kind of interesting to note. And so I think it would be a good idea if anyone ever, presents themselves to you as Middle Eastern from a Middle Eastern country, to maybe ask them what religion they have if you are speaking about those things and not automatically assume that they are Muslim. The next common misconception I heard from mostly my mom's generation, my parents' generation, was the fact that having a heavy accent tends to lead others to not expect them to understand or be very smart. And many immigrants from the Middle East and all parts of the world really come here and have extensive educations from their home countries, but unfortunately they don't correlate well coming here given the language barrier. So it made me take a moment to think back to to just being mindful of the fact that although there is a language barrier, we have to be patient with people, but not assume that maybe they don't fully understand things because they're not smart enough, but it just is based off the language barrier. A common question that I receive from people often is why I identify myself as Persian rather than Iranian. And it's kind of a funny subject. I mean, I'm sure you guys are aware there was at one point the Persian Empire, which was doing really well until the Spartans kicked our butts. So the Persian Empire was such a big, vast part of the world and is so rich in culture. And Iran is really the center of the Persian Empire if you look on the map. And given all of the recent negativity and stereotypes related to being Middle Eastern with either the Iranian hostage crisis or 9/11, I've gotten the sense that people from my culture have tried to distance themselves from the territory and the perceptions from saying I'm Iranian or I'm from Afghanistan or those places, and try to associate more with the culture. And saying Persian is a little bit more of a prideful thing, I think, for my culture. So the next thing I'd like to talk to you guys about are practices that Americans do that tend to offend people of the Iranian culture. First is, and this one's fairly simple, we set ourselves up for failure. When you look on a map, Iran is spelled I-R-A-N, and you would expect it's Iran, but it's really Iran. So that's an easy way to kind of make someone feel comfortable and just, not insecure or weird about where they're from, is to acknowledge that the way to pronounce the name of the country is actually Iran. The other thing that I've noticed is sometimes whenever I say I'm Iranian or I'm Middle Eastern, it's automatically assumed that people think I speak Arabic. They're like, we heard earlier in the presentation, there are lots of languages in the Middle East, and the one in Iran specifically is Farsi. The second common offensive act that Americans kind of do that Persians are not so fond of, and is something that will come as a shock to many of you. Here in this country, it is very common, especially now on Zoom, for us to give people a thumbs up for something when it's good, or you're giving them assurance that yes, okay, or great, it's a sign of something good. I mean, it's gone to the extent of Facebook having a button for it. However, it'll surprise you that in Iran, when you give someone a thumbs up, you're actually giving them the middle finger. So it's something to be mindful of. Most people who are here and have kind of assimilated understand that that is a good thing. However, if you are in the Middle East, or if you're speaking with someone who's older, giving them the thumbs up may give them a very different impression as to what you were trying to say. The third thing that I can bring up to you guys is, and I think this can apply more so not just for being Middle Eastern, but across the board. My mom, when I spoke to her about this topic in getting ready for the presentation, I asked her if there was something that, ever offended her, or what types of things have been hard for her. And I remember us talking one day about her asking me, Mona, what does hold your horses mean? Is it a bad thing? Did I do something wrong? And it made me realize that she didn't understand the basic metaphor of, hold your horses, like wait. And I had to explain it to her. So I think as attorneys and judges, we all have to communicate with so many different types of people, and we use metaphors often to try to do that. But I think when speaking with people who have English as their second language, it's not always the best idea to use metaphors that are not clear. My mom thought she had done something wrong and didn't understand, and it confused her further. So that is another fun fact for you guys. Another just quick fact for you is it is actually the week leading up to Persian New Year. Our New Year starts at the first day of spring. So this Saturday is Persian New Year, and it is a really fun time for our culture. We do a lot of cool things at this time of year. It's a month leading up to Persian New Year. And so if you have any Iranian friends, make sure to wish them a happy Persian New Year.
Great, wonderful, Mona. Thank you so much. Lots of tidbits and cultural nuances that's going to be very helpful to all of us. So with that, I would like to turn to Summer Selleck. There you are. And Summer works in probate and elder law, and they are also vice chair of the diversity committee for the Contra Costa County Bar. And today they will be speaking from the LGBTQ+ perspective. Welcome, Summer.
Thank you, Benisa. Can you hear me okay? I just want to make sure.
Yes.
Okay,
Loud and
great.
clear.
So tonight I'm going to talk about gender neutrality. And what that is it's the idea that policy, language, and other social institutions should avoid distinguishing roles according to people's sex or gender. So small tweaks to our language usage can go a long way to respect non-binary individuals, such as myself. And they may also have the additional benefit of increasing overall gender equality. So a majority of languages, as we heard tonight, specifically from Mika too, a majority of languages don't have gendered pronouns. Turkish and Indonesian, Chinese and Persian, for example, don't have gender as a category for their pronouns. However, in English, using he and she is pretty common and also requires us to assign a gender to an individual. Unlike in English, many non-English languages have a gender-neutral form for people built in. In English, we're only now moving towards gender-neutral language. That's because you can't always guess someone's preferred pronouns by their appearance. Asking and correctly using someone's pronouns is a way to show respect for their gender identity. For those who don't identify as either male or female, the singular they is catching on. Singular they is also being adopted by those people who do identify as gender binary, but reject the concept of genderization in language. In 2019, Merriam-Webster dictionary added they as the pronoun to use for a single person whose gender identity is non-binary. Critics, though, say that they, as both singular and plural, can be confusing and muddy a sentence's syntax. Shakespeare and Jane Austen, my friends, among many other famed English writers, didn't think so, though. They used singular they and their, as was the standard in English, until Victorian era grammarians shifted course and imposed that he was above all else. It's also not that hard to use they in a sentence in a singular usage. We do it all the time and we just don't notice. So let's say, for instance, a person comes to drop off a package and needs a signature. We might say, there's someone at the door and they need a signature to drop off a package. As a response, we would say, well, tell them I'll be right there. And in response, one might say, okay, I'll let them know. In this instance, we're using they and them because we aren't assuming gender. One could argue we should be using singular they until the correct pronouns are identified because one should never assume gender. This brings us to commonly gendered words. Words like fireman, policeman, chairman. These words are gendered and they have the word man in them. Why, you might ask? Well, that's because man was the only person who was allowed to perform these professions decades ago, sometimes longer than decades. Now that women are able to hold these positions, using gender-inclusive terms like firefighter or chair reflects the reality that the person fighting the fire or chairing the board could be a man, a woman, or non-binary. Another issue that comes up is Mr. and Mrs. Alternatives to Mr., Mrs., or Miss exist, like MX or Mix. Although, according to the majority of those who identify as gender non-binary, they prefer a turn away from titles such as Mr., Mrs., and Mix altogether. Alternatives can be Attorney Smith, or Counsel Clark, Chair Davis, Petitioner Williams, Officer Price, T-shirt Jones, etc. There's a lot more that we can talk about with this, but I hope that this shed just a little bit of light on gender neutrality for y'all. Thank you.
Thank you, Summer. That was awesome. Nice. Again, I'm getting so many tidbits, and these are things that we just overlook, and they make such a big difference to people with different cultural identities. So it's the least that we can do to work with increasing our own ability to interact more respectfully with others. And with that, I would like to turn it over to our final panelist, last but not least, and that is Celine Moe Simone. And Celine is a commercial real estate transactional attorney and broker. And she's also president of the women's section here at the Bar Association. And she will be speaking from the perspective of a Chinese immigrant. Welcome, Celine.
Thank you, Dr. Barry, and good evening, everyone. My name is Celine Mui Simon, and I was born in Hong Kong. Can we put up the slide, the PowerPoint slide? Hong Kong is a very small area of China. It's on the southern tip, and it is not part of mainland China. It was part of a British colony, and so was Macau. And so when we talk about, people ask me, oh, are you from China? I kind of take offense to that because I don't associate myself as being from China because of the politics of China. We fled Hong Kong so that we didn't have to become part of China. So just know that there is some sensitivity when people ask, or when you ask if someone is from China, because that may have some negative connotation, especially if they fled China and then they're from Hong Kong or from Macau. Just know that. So I came to this country at the age of 7, and I speak Cantonese. Cantonese is mostly spoken in the southern parts of China. What people don't commonly know is that there are 7 to 10 main dialects in China. The one I spoke is Cantonese, and Cantonese is very harsh. In fact, people make jokes that Cantonese sounds like we're arguing, and Mandarin sounds like they're speaking in a very fluid way. And the joke is, that I hear often is, I'm not arguing, I'm just speaking in Chinese. The next slide, Teresa. Said in Chinese names, the surname is in the front, and then the given name is at the end. So my Chinese name is Mui Shulang. Mui is my surname. And here in this example, the name Wang is in the beginning. And something that people don't know is when they see the surname W-A-N-G, they pronounce it Wang, but it should be pronounced Wang. And my name has a diphthong in it. I know it's not even in the English language, but you basically hold the tone. It's a third tone. It's a diphthong, so it's Moi. I've heard my name butchered so many times in court that when I got married, I just switched to Simon, and it was a lot easier in court. And oftentimes when we refer to each other, we say, oh, that's my uncle, or that's my brother, my younger sister or older brother. It just sounds like we're all related, but that's just how we refer to each other in a very friendly manner. And next slide. Chinese people are very superstitious. So I just wanted to put this slide out here so you know what the numbers mean. So if you see a phone number with lots of 8s, or a price with a lot of 8s, this is because that the sound of those numbers sound like wealth. And we want to avoid 4 because it sounds like death. Say it sounds like say, which means death. So we don't like those numbers. And next slide. Chinese people also don't like to be given clocks. Clocks is absolute no-no. The word to give someone a clock, song zong, it sounds like you're going to give that person a funeral. So we take absolute offense when somebody gives us a clock. It's okay if you don't know our culture, we don't really take offense to it, but just know that that is a cultural taboo. Another cultural taboo is giving someone a business card with one hand, like the picture on the right. It should be with both hands to show a sign of respect. So when you're giving a business card to someone who's Asian, it's best to hold it with 2 hands. Okay, I'm done with the slides. And I want to talk about bad stereotypes. bad stereotypes about Chinese people when they have a heavy accent is that they're not educated, right? But that's not necessarily true. Like there's just, Mika explained it really well, that there's, you know, the accent doesn't necessarily mean that they're not educated. It just comes from how they were raised. And another bad stereotype that Chinese people have is that they're somehow into discounts or they race to the bottom. I've heard people ask me if I'm a discount attorney just because I'm Chinese. And yes, there are a couple of people that give us bad rap, but we are just like you. We care about relationships. In fact, there's a word for it, guanhai or guanxi in Chinese, that means connections. And we care about doing something good for other people to win their loyalty and their business. And we're not necessarily the type of people that race to the bottom. And just like everybody else, we want to get the most for our buck, you know, most bang out of our buck, and get the highest amount that we possibly can when it comes to selling something or settling if we are a plaintiff. And Chinese people also get the bad rap that we're difficult to deal with because we like to negotiate everything. Please don't take offense. Chinese people bargain, and that is part of our culture. In fact, when I was in China, we bargained for everything, including buying vegetables. And we negotiate all the time when it comes to paying the bills at a restaurant. That's just how we are as a culture. We like to, sometimes we would, if you don't fight for the bill, then we just think, oh, well, you don't really respect me. Or sometimes you just have to go around stealthily to the restroom and pretend like you're going to the restroom, but pay the bill. And sometimes there are outright fights between my relatives when we're paying the bill at the restaurant. It's kind of embarrassing. And I wanted to also take this moment just to condemn the violence that has been the daily reported cases of violence against Asian Americans. It really hurts to hear all these stories of elderly Asian Americans being attacked for no reason. I just wanted to say that words matter. Xenophobic rhetoric has consequences, and I think it's irresponsible to attach the origin of a virus. To this day, like even in the news yesterday, I heard that there is a UK variant or a Brazilian variant. It is unacceptable, and that we should not stand for it. And the rhetoric has gotten so bad that violence against Asian Americans have increased by 1,900% in the US since this pandemic started. There are nearly 3,000 reported cases so far, and 7.3% are from elderly Asians. And there were 8 Asian people that have been attacked 2 days ago in Atlanta, Georgia. And thank you for the opportunity to share my perspective.
Great, thank you so much. That was great, Celine. Muy Simon. Great. So that includes all of our panelists. And at this point, we'd like to open it up to questions or comments. Please put those in the chat, and Teresa is going to help us go through those questions. So again, I just want to iterate that these were snippets. Each one of these could have been a full presentation in and of itself, and hopefully is whetting your appetite to be eager to learn more. So any questions or comments for any of the panelists, or just in general about any of the topics that were presented? Great. Okay. So I'm not sure if we're going to be able to do a closing poll that we had, Teresa.
Yes, I'm going to ask Ann Wolf if you can put up the poll asking people what they're interested in learning more about.
Okay.
Teresa,
So
you have to
while-
make me host again.
I'm sorry.
You have to make me host again.
Oh, my apologies. Okay.
No, no,
Right, I
no
think
worries.
polling can only be done by the host.
Yeah,
So-
unfortunately, it's not giving me access to the polling. All right.
Right. So what this poll is to assess the interest for going deeper into any of the perspectives that were presented tonight, not even necessarily on the particular cultural nuance or difference or situation that was presented, but just different perspectives that you'd like to learn about that would be useful to you on a professional or personal level. So that is what the poll is. And while that is being put up, I'm going to turn this back over to Judge Reyes to say some closing comments. But prior to that, and while you are completing the poll, I do want to thank all of the panelists and Judge Reyes for making this possible. And of course, this was Judge Reyes's brainchild, and he pulled us all together to make it happen in a very short time period. And when I look at the richness of the experience that we all have, someone mentioned they didn't have any studies to reference or to refer to in their presentation, and they were only talking from their own experience. Well, this is what this is really about. It's about lived experience and acknowledging people for that lived experience and what can be shared within the Bar Association community that can create a more inclusive and respectful place for all of our attorneys, judges, clients, and everyone, staff, and everyone at Bar Association, and everyone that we come in contact with. So the poll is up. Please include any additional perspectives that may be of interest to you that are not specifically or explicitly listed in the poll. So don't hesitate to check the other and type in your suggestions in the chat if the interest area that you might want to have more information on is not listed. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Judge Reyes for some closing remarks.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Barry. I really appreciate your taking the opportunity to moderate this panel. This is really a group exercise, and I know that you've credited me with this idea. It's not it's not my idea. This is an organization and group effort of the Contra Costa County Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee, and every single panelist have added very important insight to this event. The goal here ultimately, and I think everyone is on board with this, is to create a more inclusive bar and bench in Contra Costa County. And if we take just a little step to educate each other about the differences of our culture and celebrate them as strengths, then we will become a stronger bar, a stronger bench, and a stronger community because of that. So thank you very much for attending. We were concerned that this wouldn't be well attended this evening, and at one point in time we had more panelists than we had attendees. So you've proven us that this is an important topic in conversation, and hopefully we'll be able to do some more in the future. So thank you very much, everyone.
Great.
Great. Thank you all for attending.
Ooh, so it seems as though we have interest across the board, almost. African American identity, LGBTQ plus identity, Middle Eastern, Latinx, people living with a disability, and Jewish identity. So that actually, as the chair of the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee, that makes me feel really good that there is interest in expanding our awareness and taking time to create that learning and using our own membership and experiences to share with each other. So with that, thank you and good night.
All right. Have a great night, everybody. Thank you. Hope to see you at another program soon.